Before we start the clock, I'd like to say thank you to the club for hosting this event, and to my opponent, Mark, for being here, and for taking up the challenge, and also my guests, Kevin and Susanna, if you're out there somewhere. Okay, guess not. Okay, so, okay, can you hear me now? Is it okay? Okay. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe has a cause. Several modern discoveries of cosmology, such as Einstein's general theory of relativity in 1915, Hubble's observations of the galaxies, NASA's COBE satellite discoveries of slight temperature variations in the cosmic background radiation, which prove that the universe has a beginning, refute two of four major worldviews, which are pantheism, this includes Buddhism, Hinduism, and New Age religions, and materialism, that's naturalism or atheism. The remaining two worldviews are deism and theism. Deism, at least in its classical sense, holds that God created the universe and had nothing to do with it after that. Later, by proving the reliability of scriptures, I intend to refute that concept. It follows logically that the two premises that the universe has a cause. As a cause of space and time, it must be able to transcend space and time, and therefore be changeless and immaterial, since material things are constantly changing at the molecular and atomic levels. In addition, it must be uncaused, because you can't have an infinite regress of causes. This entity must be unimaginably powerful, if not omnipotent, since it created the universe without any material cause. The fine-tuning of the universe is due to either physical necessity, chance, or design. It's not due to physical necessity or chance. Therefore, it's due to design. There's also an extensive amount of fine-tuning in the cosmos. What I mean by fine-tuning is a delicate balance of initial conditions that were given in the Big Bang. There's two types of fine-tuning. There's the laws of nature, which are expressed as mathematical equations. They appear as certain constants, such as a force of gravity. But these constants aren't determined by the laws of nature. Also, there are certain arbitrary quantities, such as the amount of entropy or the balance between the matter and antimatter in the universe. All of these constants and quantities exist within an extremely narrow range of life-permitting values. In addition, their ratios to one another must be finely tuned. This increases the improbability astronomically. For instance, as of 2014, astrophysicist Hugh Ross and his team found over 800 characteristics of the universe that appear fine-tuned to support life. Here's just one. Every one of the 10 billion trillion stars is required in the observable universe to support life on Earth, every one. If there were fewer stars in the observable cosmos, just one taken away, nuclear fusion would be so inefficient that the only elements to form would be hydrogen and helium. If there were more stars in the universe, add one, all the elements would be heavier than iron. In addition, it would prevent the formation of carbon, nitrogen, and oxygen, which are essential for human life. As it turns out, the vast reaches of the cosmos are not a big waste of space, energy, matter, or time. Nearly all 800 of these fine-tuning features has to be better than 1 part in a trillion, since a small deviation would prevent advanced life from existing on Earth, and in most cases, any life at all. The first alternative, physical necessity, is implausible because the constants and quantities are independent of the laws of nature. So, for example, the most promising candidate for a theory of everything, or a superstring theory, fails to predict uniquely our universe. String theory allows a cosmic landscape of over 10 to the power of 500. That's 1 with 500 zeros behind it. different possible universes governed by the present laws of nature. So it does nothing to render the observed values of the constant quantities physically necessary. As for the second alternative being due to chance, the problem with this alternative is that the mathematical odds against a life-permitting universe getting created are so great, it can't be realistically faced. If the major works of the New Testament are eyewitness accounts written within 2 generations of the events, then they're not likely to be legend. Just in case you're wondering, I'm jumping into the archaeological and historical. The reason is because historical research indicates that a myth can't begin to crowd out historical facts while the eyewitnesses are still alive. And by some standards, the lag period can be 3 generations because eyewitnesses are still around to correct historical records. Such is the case in the early 21st century, you might all remember, or some of you might, when revisionists tried to claim that the Holocaust never happened, but that was unsuccessful because we have written eyewitness testimony. The likely reason for the time gap and for the small amount of writings on Jesus is that most Galilean peasants in first century Palestine were illiterate in an oral culture. So instead, they practiced faithfully memorizing events and verbally passing them on. In addition, most literate people today, most literate people then did not write books, as most literate people today don't write books. All the books of the New Testament were written before AD 100. It's about 70 years after the death of Jesus. Before AD 100. And we know it was before 70 AD because there's no mention of the correctly prophesied destruction of the city of Jerusalem and the temple by the Romans anywhere in the New Testament. And considering the vast amount of details included that I'll talk about later, it definitely would have been mentioned had the writings occurred after the Roman invasion. Also, nothing was mentioned about the Apostle Paul's death, nor the death of Jesus' brother, who was a leader of the church in Jerusalem. The book of Acts was written before AD 62. We know that because Luke writes about Paul and Jesus' brother James. And James was still living, but both were executed prior to AD 68. We know they were executed before that because of extra biblical sources, such as several early church fathers, including Clement of Rome, other writings in the first century, and Josephus. The Gospel of Luke is estimated to have been written in AD 60 because Luke reminds the Roman official Theophilus of having written to him earlier. In their book, Dr. Geisler and Turek list, which is, I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. Dr. Geisler and Dr. Turek list 84 historically confirmed details which the Apostle Luke obtained from careful interviews of eyewitnesses, and 59 details which the Apostle John records in the book of John. The details accurately record information such as names of local politicians, local slang, local weather patterns, local topography, local business practices, even the correct depth of the sea, 1/4 mile off Malta, as Luke's ship's about to run aground. And this was during a storm. Because of his extensive detail and level of accuracy that surpasses almost all other historical data, secular or religious, numerous historians have deemed Luke to be a historian of the highest ranking and placed among the world's most distinguished. John was an eyewitness. He records at least 59 details. Many of them are historically confirmed. Matthew and Mark also prove reliable because they have similar basic stories. Many artifacts, cities, civilizations, kings of the Old Testament have been confirmed in archaeological and historical records. And many references were made to it by Jesus Christ and other important figures. By implication, the Old Testament is true. Paul and Peter provide fifth and sixth written testimonies to the resurrection. For instance, in archaeological excavations, between 1914 and 1938, the 5 colonnades at the pool of Bethesda uncovered the structure that was destroyed by Romans in 70 AD, and is exactly as John described it in John 5:2. Since there is early and historically confirmed independent eyewitness testimony within one generation of the events, the New Testament events can't be legendary, but are very reliable. Well, I went faster than my 15 minutes. So.
Are you good? Okay, let's give him a round of applause. Thank you. All right, Mark's coming up for his 15 minutes.
All right, I love Calvin. Okay, so can everybody read this? Calvin and his good friend Hobbes are talking. Calvin is announcing to Hobbes, well, I've decided I believe in Santa Claus no matter how preposterous he sounds. Hobbes says, what convinced you? And Calvin responds, a simple risk analysis. I want presents, lots of presents. Why risk not getting them over a matter of belief? Heck, I'll believe anything they want. Hobbes responds, how cynically enterprising of you. Calvin says, it's the spirit of Christmas. I don't know if you guys read Calvin over the years, but he's rather anyway, he can easily be bought off. Okay, let's go over what I believe first so you know what I'm talking about and where I'm coming from. I believe in rational thought, intellectual honesty, compassion, kindness, love, and doubt. I think that based on these, it's a good way to order a person's life. I don't believe in unfounded faith or belief, superstition, or delusions. We're all faced with a decision trying to decide what is real, what is true. And I want to know what is true. Whether it's an idea, something that is just happening inside my mind, there's not just something that's happening within my mind, but whether it's true for the universe outside of my mind. It matters to me what is true. Does it matter to you? And every day I think we're faced with this question. We wake up, we've had dreams. So I'll lie there in bed. Was that real or wasn't it? I had a dream a couple of weeks ago where I could fly. I could float through the air and fly. So I woke up and kind of related that dream to the reality around me, and I can't just fly if I want to. All right, so we're all doing this in my thing. Our brains are very good at making up stories. But we try to correlate those stories to the world around us and see which is true. What is faith? A lot of people will put forth, well, I have faith in something, or I believe in something, as though that really counts for what is true in the world around us. Well, faith to me is just belief without any evidence. And it's pretending to know things that you don't know. What are gods? To me, gods are just magical, invisible beings. So as we look around the world, and I'll be getting to this a little bit more in the next upcoming slides, we can look at beliefs of people in different countries and different religions and cultures. And Saudi Arabia is one form of Islam, and Iran is another form of Islam, Tunisia is another form of Islam, Thailand is largely Buddhist, India is largely Hindu with hundreds of gods. And over time, we can go back in time. Norway was largely Christian, Lutheran. Germany was Christian, Catholic, and Lutheran. Mexico was largely Catholic. And Salt Lake City is, of course, largely Mormonism. Could they all be wrong? Or could just one of them be right? Let's look around the world. Here are the major religions, the map of the world's religions right here, and you can see several things. You can see how localized they are, how it's not mixed up completely. So here's a little chart of what people in the world believe. About a third are Christian, half of those roughly are Catholic, a little over a fifth are Islam, then you've got non-religious, a little over 11%, and then Hinduism and other types of belief structures. What can we tell from these diagrams? Well, we can certainly see that there are many religions, and the believers are not randomly distributed. We can also know, and from our own experience and looking around us, that people largely believe what they were brought up in. And we can also look over history and understand how different religions came to be in different areas, whether it was by conquest, wars, migration, or first conversions. As you likely know, the best indicator of a person's religion is the religion that they were raised in. Would this be true if there were just one God, when actually there are many people having different beliefs? So worldwide, over the last 10,000 years that we know of, when basically civilization has come into effect, there have been about 10,000 different religions, distinct ones, with several major characters and about 1,000 gods. Here's a list of about 200 of those gods. They're largely different, different gods have different characteristics. Truly, if there were one true God, everybody should be experiencing him. But this shows that gods are largely man-made, created out of our imaginations, just like our dreams are. Christianity itself, we talk about Christianity often, and Christian leaders like to talk about this. But in truth, there are over 34,000 different denominations of Christianity, each with its own description of their God, Yahweh, and what's true and what isn't true. Even if there were one single God, what are the odds of any God believer believing in a particular God, believing in the correct God? However, there is absolutely no reliable evidence for any of these gods, especially the Christian God Yahweh. This, I think, is a good thing. And I'll talk about that later. Where do gods come from? If you look at it, and I've been showing you the evidence, humans are very good at creating gods. We've created thousands of gods. We look around, people believe in different gods, different variations of gods. So we're very good at creating gods, just like we are at creating dreams. Let's look at some of the reasons that humans are good at creating gods. So this is a little talk that I got from Michael Shermer. It's a really delightful talk. Let's imagine that you're an Australopithecus afarensis about 2.3 million years ago. You're sitting in the grasslands of the savannah in Africa, and your name is Lucy. You hear a little rustle in the grass. You're just sitting there, you hear a rustle behind you. You've got to make a quick decision. Is that rustle a little burst of wind coming through, or is it a tiger about to jump on you and eat you? Well, you've got a quick decision to make. Should you get up and run, hop on the nearest tree? Will you be pretty safe? Or should you figure that it's just a gust of wind and there's no real danger? So there are two ways you can go on this. If you think it's a tiger, but it's not, you've made an error. But it's only a relatively minor error. You've lost very little. You hop up on the tree, you look back, oh, it was just the grass. But if you think it's the wind and it was actually a tiger, you've made a type 2 error. And you're lunch. Not are you lunch, but your genes are pulled out of the gene pool. Kind of a Darwinian type move. All right? So natural selection is going to favor people who tend to think of type 1 errors, where you're better off just worrying, just thinking that everything's out there to get you, that there are tigers everywhere, that the universe basically has intentionality. It has agenticity, which is a term that Michael Shermer created, that is trying to get you. To imagine the universe as a thing out there as separate from you that is out to get you. Over the hundreds of thousands of generations since Lucy, and even before Lucy, we have all descended from them and been influenced by this concept. We're better off thinking of the universe as having agenticity, as having an actual thought process trying to get you. It increases your survival rate. I was thinking about this yesterday. We all make this same error rate. I'll bet that most of you locked your apartment or house before you came here. Odds are actually low that would matter, but you make this error knowingly, and that's a good idea. You locked your car, I expect, in the parking lot, knowing that odds are actually very low that somebody would come and try to break into your car, but you do it anyway. So we're still making this kind of error, and it's a good thing. There's nothing wrong with it. But I just wanted to point out, we're still doing this. We're still imagining that rustle in the grass to be a tiger. Andy Thompson online has a great hour-long talk that I first heard several years ago at an American Atheist Convention that talks about his perspective on how humans create gods. We are social beings. We communicate. We talk to each other. A large part of this process is that we imagine each of us to have a mind. When I talk to you, I imagine you have minds that can understand what I'm saying. If I go to Germany, somebody would think I have a German influence mind and speak to me in German. If I go to Norway, they'd speak to me in Norwegian, expecting I could understand. So we imagine having minds in other people. We project this onto you. We don't think of ourselves as just automatons out there of other people. So we project this mind out to each other. Now, it's just one small step from projecting a mind onto individuals to projecting a mind onto the entire universe itself. Humans and most mammals need love in our lives. Young mammals, especially humans, need care to survive, and love helps to create this care. Without love, mothers would be much less likely, mothers of most species would be much less likely, mothers and fathers especially, would be much less likely to care for their offspring. It's love that keeps them from turning their baby into pot stew. Okay, seriously. Therefore, love is evolutionarily desirable, and we've come from a long line of people, of humans, and other species before us. Anybody who's ever seen species care for the young. I was planning on having some cute pictures here of dogs and puppies and cats and kittens and elephants and baby elephants, but I didn't put them in. Okay. Let's look at the characteristics of God that humans would want. Okay, so we're going to create a God. Well, it'd probably be male. Males are big and powerful because besides most cultures are patriarchal. Well, if we're going to create a God, we might as well make him powerful, even all-powerful. What good is a God that can't do anything? We would make him knowledgeable because, well, God's going to know everything. We're going to give him all these super characteristics. We're going to make him loving because, as I pointed out, we need love. So we create a God that loves us and any offspring of God, okay? God would also be jealous because, well, humans are jealous. And there's parts in the Bible that describe God as being jealous. And what better grant than to give us eternal life? Very few people that I know really want to die to cease existence. So let's give our God the ability to grant eternal life. Now, what would religious leaders want to add to this to increase their own power? Well, they'd really want anybody who disagrees with them would have to be disagreeing with God. So God would punish those who disagree. God would reward those who agree. Let's say a really great reward, eternal bliss. Muslims have a really great concept, as you likely know, of eternal bliss, and even better eternal bliss than Christians have. God would require intermediaries to speak for him. Of course, these religious leaders are going to have the power of God when they speak. And God would reward people who give money and time to these religious leaders. Sounds like a pretty good deal for the religious leaders. Jesus. Can everybody read this? Okay, this is my view of Jesus. It's a great little cartoon. Let's start off, I'll just point out there's no reliable evidence that Jesus ever existed. I'll begin becoming in my next talk showing why the Bible is unreliable. Let's point out Jesus is a created character. He has many similarities to characters at the time. I'm running short on time, so I'll skip this. Here are all the characters who were reborn, who were born on the winter solstice, the old winter solstice. There are also many stories at the time of gods with the Virgin Father and the Virgin Mother and Divine Father, or some other miraculous birth. Right? Tyrants try to kill them as children. Other similar characters of the time here, very similar to the Jesus story. All reliable evidence shows that Jesus is just a myth, created from previous myths. Paul, if you read him, he did not think of a Jesus as a living character. To Paul, Jesus was a celestial intermediary. Paul had no knowledge of Jesus' life, no knowledge of a real living Jesus. And he should have, if Jesus had really existed. Because Paul was alive when Jesus should have existed. Paul, if you read Paul, he got all his ideas from Scripture, other religions, or visions that he had. Paul specifically said that what he got from no man. Paul also dismissed, for instance, Peter as teaching a different gospel. And at the time, secular writers wrote nothing about Jesus, and they would have had he been as well known at the time. So I'll get into this one right here. This is the disadvantages of lack of belief in any God. And these are the advantages. I'm about out of time, so I won't get into that. Okay. Thank you very much. We'll be talking later.
Thank you. You can leave that up. Mark, it's only 5 minutes, so you can leave that up if you want to, if you're going to need it later. And we'll turn your mic off. Okay. Will has his first rebuttal for 5 minutes. And if you want to bring some questions up, please do.
Mark mentioned that he was in favor of rational thought and kindness, and is not into delusional beliefs. So am I. Which is why I presented, 3 forms of compelling evidence in the form of cosmology, cosmological, teleological, archaeological, historical evidence that God does exist. There is an extensive amount. For the life of me, I can't even find what I was trying to look for. But as I mentioned, historical evidence about Jesus does exist. The accuracy of the New Testament is pretty much almost unsurpassed when compared to just about any other book in the ancient world. Some textual experts have ranked it, have estimated the accuracy at like 99.5% accurate. And the reason being is because it comes from so many manuscripts. There's thousands of manuscripts. It's true that the original was lost, but there are tens of thousands of manuscripts. Manuscripts are copies, and a lot of skeptics might say, well, yeah, there's 200,000 errors. These aren't errors. These are variants of the manuscript. And these variants are extremely small. We're talking about punctuation errors, spelling errors, which is a vast majority of them. And also, when they count 200,000, what they do is they'll find one single word misspelled, and they'll one single word in one verse might be misspelled. And they'll say, well, they had 2,000 manuscripts of that, so therefore automatically it's 2,000 errors. It's not, it's one error. So that's a gross, overestimation of the amount of variants that are in there. So as far as, there's also a number of other reasons why we can be sure that Jesus Christ really is who he said he is. Well, for one thing, many of his, there are many very detailed passages in the New Testament regarding, almost embarrassing facts of both the apostles themselves and Jesus Christ. I mean, things like Jesus being called a lunatic, a drunkard. His disciples abandoned him in certain cases. Now, why would they put that? If they were really coming up with a legendary story, why would they put that in the... Not only was it of Jesus Christ, their very leader, and that they also abandoned him was another thing that they would write in that. But even the apostles themselves would write things like, well, one of the apostles was called, Satan. Why would they write these sort of things in there if they were making up a legendary tale about this whole thing? It's not likely. It's very unlikely they would do that, write about their own leader, their own Savior. So in conclusion, there's a great deal of evidence for the New Testament. And just by implication, it carries out to the Old Testament as well. So, thank you.
All right, thanks, Will. Mark will have his 5-minute rebuttal, number 1.
We'll make a big deal out of the cause of the universe, as though God is needed for the cause of the universe. Well, for a long time, gods were needed to explain a lot of unknown things. It was called the God of the gaps. Why did something happen? Well, God did it. We all know this concept. Up until the last couple dozen years, we didn't really know what the cause of the universe was, but that did not mean that some God did it, just like it didn't mean when we didn't know where the earth came from or where anything else came from, we didn't say automatically that meant a God did it. Lawrence Krauss has written a great book that's largely accepted called A Universe from Nothing that shows our whole universe. Unbelievably it sounds in what we're used to in Newtonian physics, our universe could literally come from nothing but a quantum fluctuation. This doesn't make sense in our common physics, but it does in the physics of Einstein and the physics of quantum mechanics. We all made a big deal out of the fine-tuning of the universe. Once again, just because we don't know something does not mean that a God did it. We don't know yet exactly why the parameters are in the universe, or maybe that it's the only way to make a universe. There's also a concept that we have right now that many physicists are exploring called the multiverse, where we could have perhaps an infinite number of universes, each with its own set of parameters, and we would only exist in a universe that allows us to exist. It's called the anthropic principle. Hugh Ross, in Reasons to Believe, he didn't note Hugh Ross's. Hugh Ross likes to come up with big numbers, huge numbers, this and that. I've seen him add in the probability of a Jupiter being in a planetary system. Well, that's got to be so low, so therefore the odds on having an Earth in an Earth-like planet with Jupiter thus decreases the odds. Once again, he's just making up numbers. He has no idea what they really are. Well, made a big deal out of the eyewitnesses of the Gospels. Nowhere in the Gospels does any of the writers say that he is an eyewitness to this. It's all written as a story. Then Jesus did this, then Jesus did that, Jesus thought this, Jesus prayed that. It's all written as a story. Plus, biblical scholars have shown that all the Gospels are based out of the first Gospel, Mark. They're all additions from Mark. Luke has about 2/3 of what Mark wrote, as I recall, of the 666 original verses in Mark. There are about 600 in Matthew and about 300 in Luke. This is not written as independent witnesses. These are just written as stories, or some person or some people sat down, took another gospel and created their own little story, adding in their own little concepts. Jesus varies between the gospels. In one gospel, in the first gospel, Mark, he's very timid. He's very worried about the upcoming execution. When you get finally to John, Jesus is basically, give it to me, I'm ready to go. So Jesus varies depending on the individual writers of the Gospels. These, of course, we have no original manuscripts, but we do have evidence that people like stories. We like great stories. We like Superman. We like Batman, maybe, okay? Most of us grew up with these great stories. Jesus is just another Superman or Batman who was created as a myth. There's no evidence contradicting this. There's no secular evidence, as I pointed. Nobody wrote about Jesus in the first century, and many people should have. Will mentioned Josephus. Josephus is not a witness. The two places in Josephus where Jesus is mentioned, especially the large one, it has been shown to be a complete edition written probably by Eusebius for the Council of Nicaea that Constantine put on. If you read it, you can see obviously it was inserted. I don't have time to go into it. Luke was not an historian. We have no idea who wrote any of the Gospels. The names on the Gospels were not added probably until the 2nd century. Therefore, the Gospels are not eyewitnesses. In fact, nobody ever has written anywhere that they saw Jesus, that they knew what he did. So the Gospels are riddled with facts. For instance, the last few verses of Mark, the ones where they talk about snake handling and drinking poisons, weren't added until Mark was written. A lot of people died from handling these snakes, as you probably know. The Gospels, as I pointed out, have different Jesuses. Even the people with Paul, the apostles, talk about different Jesus, and Paul openly dismisses the other apostles of the time, like Peter. Paul talks about going to Jerusalem and dismissing Peter as though he's talking about a different Jesus. If Jesus had been real and Jesus had known Peter, Paul would not be dismissing Peter. So we have no evidence at all that any God is needed for the creation of the universe, for the creation of species, for the creation of life on this planet. We do have excellent evidence that science is starting to explain everything. And I'm out of time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. All right, Will will come up for a 5-minute second rebuttal.
Yeah, Mark brought up a few points, starting with the quantum theory. Yes, that's true. Quantum particles can act they can behave very differently to classical mechanics. They don't behave like that. However, that's an unproven theory. There's no evidence of that whatsoever. I mean, not that they can behave differently, but about a parallel universe. And if you were to believe that anyways, you might as well believe everything to be unreal. In other words, this whole room may not even exist because there could be a parallel universe where all these quantum particles are actually behaving differently from here. Quantum particles can tunnel through, energy barriers, do all kinds of weird things. That's true. But there's no evidence that we do have a parallel universe or a multi-universe, and if we did, even that would require a creator. Hugh Ross's his big numbers not being real. I mean, when he's talking trillion, if you were to take off, if you were to actually mathematically calculate the actual probability, and he was off by one of those trillion phrases, does that still change the probability as being, from a very low probability to a to a high probability? Not really, does it? So, I know he has his calculations in some of his books and how he's done it, not all of them. But the point is that the probability is low. Eyewitnesses, I already covered. There are eyewitnesses. We can go back and forth on that, but anyways, as far as Josephus, I guess Mark was implying that there was a fraudulent copy of that. Well, that is true that it has been altered, but the original, excuse me, I'll worry about that later. The original can still be detected. In other words, if you were to paint a mustache on the Mona Lisa, can you still detect what the original looks like? Of course. It's a slight variation. And if I recall right, the part that makes it fraudulent would be the part that says, and Joseph, and he believed that Jesus was the Messiah. When scholars have reconstructed that, how it most likely would have read, and his prophets, his apostles believed that Jesus was the Messiah. So, And so it's still very detectable what the original was. And it still is a valid form of historical evidence. And that's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Will. So we'll do last rebuttal for Mark.
Since I have a minute 35, I just...
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, sorry. I want to make a few points where materialism fails. In their book, I Don't Have Enough to Faith to Be an Atheist, Dr. Norman Geisler and Frank Turek list 5 reasons why materialism fails. 1, highly complex and coded information can't be explained by natural laws and undirected processes. And let me add, information always comes from intelligence, not random undirected processes. There are many examples of that. Some things are not comprised only of materials. Thoughts, convictions, and emotions involve brain chemicals, but are not comprised only of them. You can't weigh love or analyze the chemical composition of hate. Life is more than just materials. If it weren't, then it'd be possible to recreate a human being with complex brain, cells, and using only materials. There's something clearly beyond materials, which is why you can't always explain why one body is dead and another is alive. Both bodies have the same chemicals. What combinations of materials can explain consciousness? If materialism is true, then all of human history who has ever had any kind of spiritual experience is mistaken. Even the most rational, scientific, and critical minds, such as Moses, Isaiah, Newton, Pascal, Jesus Christ, many others. We've got to be talking about thousands, if not millions. If just one spiritual experience in the entire history of the world is true, then materialism is false. And 5th, if materialism is true, then reason itself is false. Because if mental processes are nothing but chemical reactions in the brain, then there's no reason to believe that anything is true, including the theory of materialism. Chemicals can't evaluate whether or not a theory is true. Chemicals don't reason, they react. Excuse me. That's,
Okay, that's good. That's good. Thank you. All right, now Mark has 5 minutes for a rebuttal, his last rebuttal.
Okay, am I cooking? Great. Okay, we've got a lot to cover. We have 5 minutes to do it. Quantum theory. Quantum theory does not make any sense. All the great quantum scientists I've ever read say it does not make rational sense. If you think you understand it, you don't really know it. But it shows that we can have a universe created out of nothing. And just even if we were to grant that some magical being created the universe, you still have all your work cut out for you to try and make that invisible magic being the particular God we're talking about. The multiverse is just a hypothesis. Nobody actually claims it's true, but there's a lot of research going on. But just because something like a universe being created with low probability, just because it's a low probability event, does not mean it could not have happened. There's no way to know the odds on the universe. Hugh Ross is just making up big numbers. Okay, there's no way to know. Nobody knows. Nobody knows why the parameters are the way they are. It could be that that's the only way a universe could come into being. If they were any different, the universe would have collapsed immediately or would have expanded so fast that we wouldn't exist. Josephus, apparently, Will has never read the Josephus bit, because if you read the whole thing talking about Jesus is obviously inserted. The paragraph before talks about where Pontius Pilate had some Roman soldiers go out in a crowd, and at a preordained moment they pull out their swords and slaughter a bunch of people. Then you've got this great paragraph about Jesus being hardly, he's so great, he's so wonderful. Then the next paragraph goes, and then another terrible thing happened to the Jews. This paragraph in Josephus' writing in the, I forget, it was written around 92, is obviously inserted by somebody else. Nobody had ever written it. The library that it came from was originally owned by Origen, and Origen was very widely read at the time. Nobody had ever mentioned it before until it actually showed up around 324 for the Council of Nicaea, when Constantine was looking to create a new religion. It was looking to congregate and create a religion to control the people with. So Josephus is not evidence for Jesus actually existing. Without Josephus, you have no writer of the first century, and many who should have known about Jesus, none. Somehow the natural laws can explain, somehow Will says the natural laws cannot explain the complexity we have around us. I see nothing contradictory about natural laws. We had a talk fairly recently about snowflakes are formed under natural conditions. Snowflakes are obviously very complex. We see complex patterns in clouds. Complexity abounds in the universe. Molecules tend to naturally form complex shapes, and we now have a pretty good idea about how life came into being as complex as we are. And once life came into being, the rules of evolution, the process of evolution, can create all the complex forms around us. This is called emergent behavior, and it's well known within science. Consciousness does not contradict materialism. Just because materialism is true doesn't mean we can't think. Just because a computer is made out of electronic material parts doesn't mean it can do a rudimentary amount of thinking. Spiritual experiences can be wonderful, but once again, there's no external evidence that they're true. Just like your dreams. Just like my dream where I thought I could fly. When we wake up in the morning, we look around us. Is this real? Well, it was a fun dream, but it's not real. So there's no evidence at all for any God, much less Yahweh. Yahweh, you can be shown, was created out of earlier gods. Even the Hebrews, their versions of God changed. If you read in Genesis, the story changes. At one point, God is walking around Adam and Eve saying, Adam, have you done this? Okay, and it talks about other gods. God himself in the Bible talks about other gods. So it's all just created stories, just like the Gospels and the epistles about Jesus. They're all just created stories from our tremendous imaginations. And that's wonderful, but it doesn't mean they really exist. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. Okay, Will, you have your closing remarks for 5 minutes. Last 5.
Well, I'm going to leave my notes there. I'm just going to say that I have provided a great deal of evidence. I think this whole debate really boils down to what's the probability of what you believe. To say that that Yahweh was a mere creation from prior gods, if you want to believe that, you can. However, this is all about probability, and based on the evidence that I've showed you, the cosmological, the teleological, there's far more than what I can cover in the amount of time I was given. But when you think about it, you put all 800, and it just keeps stacking up. Hugh Ross's team so far, this was back like a year or two ago, that they came up with 800 specific features about the universe. And when the fine-tuning goes to figures like 10 to the power of 120, and when you have all 800 in one single universe, can that really happen at random? Think about that. I have, and I can't come to the belief that this would be by random cause, undirected processes. And that goes for the DNA molecule, that goes for basically the human brain, everything. Just a lot of too many complex things in our environment and in this world to believe that it happened all by a non-intelligent cause. Because every single bit of complexity always goes back to information. Not sometimes, not 99.99% of the times. This laptop here was designed by intelligence. This whole building was built by intelligence. Nothing could have happened by random chance. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Will. So, Mark, you have your last closing remarks for 5 minutes, and then we'll get to the questions.
We'll move on to my favorite part, which should be questions. I want to go over a couple of things that I missed. There's some idea that if the Bible is truly eyewitnesses written within 2 generations, well, we have evidence all around us all the time, and we have a fairly modern civilization where we're quite connected in many ways to people denying physical evidence. How many people believe that Elvis still exists? How many people believe that 9/11 was some sort of conspiracy theory of the Bush administration? When we have explicit evidence that this is not true. And yet there are lots of people out there who believe it. In a primitive culture such as Judea of the time, few people were literate. Many people were superstitious, and they were very willing to believe superstitious stories, I think, just as people are now. But back then it was even easier because there was no Google or Wikipedia to look things up on. Will talked about all books were written before 100 or even before 70 in the Gospels. Well, in one point, I can't remember where Jesus predicts the fall of Jerusalem. This obviously shows that whoever wrote the story knew what was going to happen, so he wrote it after the fact and then put it as a prediction, supposedly is happening in the past. This is how a lot of such predictions come about, such prophecy as it's called. Once again, just because as far as the creation of the universe, the creation of life, just because it's a low probability event does not mean it could happen, does not mean that some sort of supernatural invisible being created it. We know all along that low probability events, we know that we're very contingent. Nothing is random. Well, I imagine most of you have thought about where you came from, how one particular sperm happened to connect to one particular egg, and boom, there you are eventually. Life, the whole universe, is full of contingent events that we can't predict. For instance, just the asteroid that hit it's what's now Chicxulub in the Yucatan and killed off the dinosaurs about 65 million years ago. If that had been off just a little bit in time and space, dinosaurs would probably be still walking the earth, and we wouldn't have movies about dinosaurs. We wouldn't exist. DNA is full of information, that is sure, but it changes every time. We have mutations in our body. Every one of us has many mutations from our parents. Every one of us carries around mutations that are probably fatal, if not for the way that the DNA process works. We know quite well how life works, not perfectly. Science is always working on it. If we knew everything, we would have no need for science. I don't understand how he could claim that Josephus has any evidence at all for Jesus. I don't understand where he says natural laws can't explain rational thought. I don't understand this. It's just nonsense to me. It's BS. Quantum theory doesn't make sense. Remember that whenever you're reading anything about quantum theory, it does not make sense. The Gospels, once again, are not eyewitnesses to Jesus. Pretty much all characteristics of Jesus had existed in previous form, in previous saviors and gods. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I think I've covered all his points with rational, scientifically based arguments, and I've got a minute and a half left, so we can start our question period, my favorite part. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. All right. Oh, you're still plugged in. Just yank that cable off the back. Okay, well, we'll start with, since I have a lot of questions for Will here. So, no, it's okay, I'll stay here. So I'm just going to, there's a few that kind of go together, so I'm going to try and summarize some of these so we can get through a bunch of them. So, Will, going back to the cosmological argument, you say that everything that begins to have a cause, or everything that begins has a cause. So what would be the cause of God?
Well, the cause of God, God would have to be uncaused. There would have to be an uncaused. That's kind of an irrelevant question because it would be, you would have to go, you can't go back, regress to an infinite number of causes. It's like Occam's razor, you know, it's, there's just one simplified cause explains it all. And it would have to be an uncaused cause to create the universe.
Right, but how would you be able to demonstrate that and know that to be true? I mean, it sounds like you're just adding a attribute to God to get away from this potential problem.
I'm not sure how I can explain how an uncaused cause could happen, but you can't regress to infinity. Infinity is like it's a non-existent number. If you were to try and pile a number of pennies to infinity and you subtracted 3, what would be your answer be? It would still be infinity. You could never reach the number infinity. If the universe was eternal, we wouldn't be here. It's geology kind of explains that for one thing. For instance, the amount of, you know, lead eventually over time decays into uranium. And so if the universe were eternal, everything would be, you know, radioactive. All the lead would be uranium by now.
Okay, Mark, did you want to jump in on this, or?
Yeah, it depends.
Oh, hang on.
Okay.
Go
Now I'm
ahead.
live?
You're live.
Okay. Typically, God is defined as being unchanging. But if God created the universe, he changed. He changed from not wanting a universe to wanting a universe. That means God is not, is God unchanging?
No, he would have to also be unchanging, because our bodies change over time. He have to be timeless and unchanging in order to cause the universe to be transcendent across the universe, because otherwise he would have decayed by now.
So
You know?
this makes no sense to me. God would have to go from wanting a universe, not wanting a universe, to wanting a universe.
He would have to be transcendent and outside the
What
universe.
does that mean? What does transcendent
He
mean?
can go across time. He's not limited as we are in time. We humans are limited to a one-directional time, whereas God can be in time, in our time. He can have a timeline that is perpendicular to ours, and he can have an infinite number of timelines that are perpendicular to ours, which means that he can enter into our timeline at any particular time and exit at any particular time.
Do you not see that these characteristics are all man-made? That you're creating these characteristics of God as being all what, you know, there's the whole list of all loving, and God is transcendent. All these concepts are all man-made. We have no evidence at all of anything actually having these, but we can certainly know that our imaginations can make these up.
They're based on what is logical in order to exist as that kind of a creator. In other words, it can't be a human being. It can't be a human body. It has to be an unembodied person, an unembodied being. So basically, a superior mind would have to.
Why do you think that a universe necessitates a God? You say, first of all, we know that uncaused events happen all the time.
For the very reasons that I've given you, the cosmological, teleological, I cannot accept that this universe was created by random, unintelligent causes.
Why can't you?
Okay. we're going to move. We're going to move
go
forward.
back.
Okay, to me, it makes no sense to say it has to be caused because I look around, it looks like everything is designed. Well, we know that the design can be done without, or events can come into being without a cause.
Well, like I said, all complexity always goes back to information.
No, not necessarily.
When does it not?
Complexity is created every time.
I mean, was not your laptop, was not DNA, isn't there not 3 billion genetic code information before it goes through a mutation process?
But mutations create new information.
But the thing is, the original DNA molecule, the original RNA, protein molecules that have existed, that came into being, what was the source of that? It had to be some information.
We now know that amino acids form more complex molecules on their own naturally. We now know that there are many different physical processes that we're quite aware of that could form prebiotic type molecules. All it takes is for one of them to be self-replicating.
What do we know
poorly.
about what?
So I'm sorry, guys. I'm just going to jump in because I want to get to more
go on.
questions. So I think it's a good banter, but let's change topics here a little bit. So this is for Mark. You mentioned that there were 34,000 denominations of Christianity. Where did you get that reference from?
I've seen several of them stating from Michael Shermer and others who are more knowledgeable in this. Certainly, if we look around us, there are many, many tiny churches who claim they have the one true answer. Even if there were just 1,000 or 100, it would still bring into question the validity of any one of them, because each one claims to have the absolute truth. As I mentioned, there are snake handlers, in Kentucky, who claim that they can handle snakes without danger, even though this has not been shown. The verses in the Gospel of Mark that have this were not in the original Gospel.
I think when Mark got that figure, it most likely included not just denominations, but pseudo-Christian alternative religions. In other words, cults. Cults have a widely radical belief from mainstream Christianity. And some of those would include, the Mormonism cult, Jehovah's Witness, Children of God, etc.
So I'm sorry. I was actually a good segue because I was going to ask you another question about Mormonism. So Will, this is a two-part question. Do you consider Mormonism a myth?
I consider it a pseudo-Christian alternative religion that doesn't fall within the mainstream Christian ideology.
Okay, but you don't think it's true?
I don't follow that, no.
Okay, so here we have a first generation of people who are believing a lie, yet it's believed today as a fact by many people. So how can you believe that these gospel writers didn't just believe a lie like the Mormons and propagate it?
I believe, again, it goes back to that level of the unlikeliness I mentioned earlier, of the things they would write, the specificity that they got into and the number of details that they wrote about. It's not likely that they would have made up a legendary tale because of the historical verification of this. Archaeological confirmations, the diggings, all of this was found out to be, to verify the things that they wrote about, even to the very detail of like the water depths that Luke wrote about, a quarter mile off of Malta, and being accurate about that. These seem like very trivial details, but they tell you something about the accuracy of his writings. And not only that, but but also because of the information that he wrote regarding, he just laid it all down on the line. He reported the information very accurately, and according to many scholars, he's considered a first-rank historian. He would even write about his own, brethren, as well as, John doing that, about the things that would be embarrassing facts. If they were making up a legendary tale, it seems just too unlikely that they would do that.
Okay, Mark.
I'd like to point out, I think it's the story of Jesus is a great story if you want to believe it. You're not going to die, you're going to live forever, even though Jesus says that the way is narrow and few shall make it, which means most people are screwed to hell forever, okay? It's just a story that grew up over time that happened to make it. There were many other characters of the time, similar to Jesus, who just didn't rise to have the political power to push it. They came about through different political leaders.
Okay. We got a lot of questions, so we'll keep going. This one's for Mark. How do you account for the powerful effect that belief in God has on people's lives when they believe in God?
Belief in anything can be a very powerful inducement to act. Belief in communism, belief in Nazism, belief in God, belief in whatever is very powerful for people. That doesn't mean that it's true at all. I mean, we all know this looking at other beliefs. I met a guy I knew years ago who was an atheist, but he's walking around reading the little red book of Mao, you know? I was astounded. But talking to him about the evils that Mao had done, where 30 million people died under his leadership, was like talking to many people about God. There's this wall that came up. He refused to acknowledge anything outside of his belief structure. So it doesn't mean that it's true. Belief in God does not mean it's true. It just means it's a very powerful belief.
Did you want to talk anything about belief, Will?
Well, I think this goes back when you're talking about spiritual experiences, belief, somebody has a very powerful belief. Different people come to Christianity for different reasons. And some of it because of spiritual experiences, some because of, like what he even mentioned, or many, I would say even because of what he mentioned, parental influence. As for me, I wasn't always a Christian, but weighing out all the facts, that's what brought me to Christianity. So
That's interesting. I was actually going to ask you that. So was there one particular fact that you looked into that convinced you, or was there something else that actually brought you into Christianity?
It happened over a long process of time, and it was over a number of just reasoning that I did internally, and it wasn't a lot of this cosmological. I have to say that this came afterwards, far afterwards, but you know, I could say that for one of the reasoning things had to do with a number of prophecies. At least 25%. This is just one of them. At least 25% of the Bible makes a number of prophecies, and a lot of biblical scholars today say virtually every single one, minus about 100. Have come to realization to this date. I'll just give you, a couple examples. Like one is about the book of Daniel, and Daniel was one of Nebuchadnezzar's, King Nebuchadnezzar, who was the king of Babylon at the time, which was the world empire at the time. And Nebuchadnezzar had a dream. In a dream, a colossus statue, and the only person in the entire court, in the entire world for that matter, who was able to decipher that dream was Daniel. In that dream, basically that colossal statue talked about other world empires that were to overtake in a succession from, it went from the Babylonian Empire to the Medo-Persian Empire, who would overtake the Babylonian Empire, then by the Grecian Empire under Alexander the Great, and then by the Roman Empire, and then by the Christians. History followed exactly in that manner.
Okay, sorry,
okay.
We're just running low on time, so I don't want to get too far. Real quick.
I think it's important to note that prophecies are easy to make true if you write them after the events.
That's true.
It's very easy. You can write, well, this supposedly Daniel said this 2 centuries ago, and we know what happened afterwards. There, if you just retroactively insert, just like what was done in the New Testament, retroactively insert or misinterpret what was written in the supposed prophecies.
let me just say that it's prophesied in the Bible that Israel would once again become a nation. And this did happen after nearly 2,000 years of not having been a nation, because they lost it in the Roman invasion in 70 AD, when Rome got conquered when Jerusalem was conquered by the Romans, and they tore down the temple. But it's been prophesied that that Israel would once again become a country, and that it would become a very thriving country with many fruits and vegetables for sale. And that's exactly what it is. It's the greatest producer in the Middle East of fruits and vegetables. It became a country in approximately, I think, 1948. And it will also undergo a number of wars. This happened, the Six-Day War, a number of other wars since then. There's at least 3 or 4 wars that have occurred.
Okay, speaking of war.
Okay, can I follow through on that?
No,
It was also prophesied that Israel would never have a woman as leader. If you throw out enough stuff, some of it's going to stick.
Okay, we're gonna move away from prophecy right now. Let's talk about evil. So this is for both of you. How do you explain the prevalence of evil in the world, given your belief in the Christian God or your denial of the existence of God?
Want to go first?
Okay. No, I'll let you go first.
Okay, I'd be happy to go first.
Explain evil. Go ahead.
People can be evil. We all know that. Looking at history, in my experience, probably most of your experiences, people can be evil. There's nothing shocking about that. But we also have the capability, the desires to be good. We all know that love is needed. Most of us know that love is needed, as I pointed out. So we have the capabilities of both. Certainly no God is necessary for any of this, but just knowing human nature. The Christian God does not explain this in any way. If the Christian God were real, you would think he would have the power to make us all happy. In fact, that's one of my arguments for the lack of the Christian God. If God really loved me as an atheist, he would know that all I require is empirical evidence that existed, so I wouldn't go to hell. Yet he has not presented this. Obviously, he doesn't love me, or he doesn't exist.
Okay, so it's my turn now. I'll start with the last thing you mentioned. Actually, I would say that he does love you by not showing empirical evidence, because it's in scriptures. I believe it's in Peter that without faith, you can't please God. If God was to give you empirical evidence, full proof that he existed, just appeared here, then you wouldn't please him, because then it's not a matter of loving him because you know him, but you feel like because you trust him, but rather because you know he's there and you have no choice. To answer your question regarding the concept of all the evil, although being the most supremely powerful being in the universe, at the same time, there are certain things, few things, that are logically impossible for him to do, such as creating a one-ended stick or a square circle. And at the same time, it would be logically impossible to provide love without free will. If you had a choice, you can't have free choice and love at the same. And with that, I'm kind of getting mixed up what I'm trying to say here. But in order to have free choice and love, that's going to lead to evil. Because some people, even though the Bible is not really a rule book, but even though he outlines what you have the decision to do with your life, you can decide to sin, you can decide not to. He's not going to force you to go to heaven against your will. it's basically up to you.
Okay.
But okay.
So let me just ask another question to both of you. What would it take for either of you to change your position?
That's easy for me.
Go ahead.
Some sort of evidence that is not in any way explainable. Let's say, I've thought about this a while. It's a good question. World peace tomorrow, noon, Greenwich Mean Time. All of a sudden, everybody on this planet decides, I really don't want to do all this hatred. Love is much better. That would be pretty impressive. What are the odds on that happening? As close to zero as I can imagine. But that would be impressive. Okay? And if God is truly omnipotent, should be an easy thing for him to do. He can create a universe. He can do all these things. So it should be very easy to change the hearts of people. And it would not be violating any people's free will in any way. Even though nowhere in the Bible is God really that concerned about free will. He often kills or has killed large numbers of people. Of course, the story of the Noah's flood, he kills almost everybody. He doesn't seem to be worried about anybody's free will. So this is one small thing that God could supposedly do if he were truly all-powerful and all-knowing and all-loving. It'd be a very loving thing to do in my estimation of what love is.
Okay. Will, is there something that would change your mind?
I'm not sure what. Maybe God would have to appear and come and tell me he doesn't exist. I don't know. But it's...
Wipe your mind clean, maybe.
Yeah.
Just wipe it out. Okay, Mark, so assuming you're right and there is no God, why do you care if others choose to believe in God or not?
I care because I care about reality around me. It makes me happier to know how the
I'm
universe
sorry, I missed the
works.
question on that.
Oh, sorry. So this is for Mark. Assuming that you are right and there is no God, why do you care that other people believe in God?
I care because they impact my life. They impact the lives of other people on this planet whom I care about. If you look at history, look at the news any day. How many people are being killed, tortured, maimed in the name of particular gods? Look over history. Nazism was based on Christianity to a fair degree. Hitler told his followers he was a great Christian. Some people have said that Hitler was the most famous, the best-known Christian the first half of the last century. Obviously, people have done great evil in the names of religion, and they tend to perpetrate themselves by teaching nonsense. So it matters to me. I think the world would be a much happier place if we could reduce the amount of religion in this world, the amount of God belief. That's why I care.
In response to many wars, yes, there's a number of people who have, abused the name of religion, Christianity, for war. Jesus doesn't endorse that. The Bible doesn't endorse that. So it's not something that I would say is any Christian should follow.
Okay, this one's for you, Will.
Okay, can I get back on Will's point?
We've got like 7 minutes left.
Jesus specifically in the Bible, the character Jesus specifically talks about slaves and what you can do to them. There's nowhere in the Bible that they say slavery is wrong. If anything we know about morality, slavery is wrong.
Actually,
the Bible
the moderator
has,
is speaking.
okay.
The Bible has many places where God says, kill all these people.
Okay, so
let's
talk about the Bible for a minute.
Killing people.
Let's talk about the Bible for a minute, because there's actually a lot of questions in here, Will, about the Bible. And there seems to be a lot of discrepancies. I think you said something to the effect that they all complement each other and there's really no discrepancies. But there's a lot of questions in here, like, for instance, some specifics. Okay, like the Gospel of Mark had a short ending originally in the Codex, and now it has a longer ending. There's additional verses given. There's differences between the birthday of Jesus between Matthew and Luke. The crucifixion has a lot of different details, some contradicting each other. The women at the tomb, or not, no women at the tomb, or the angel at the tomb, or not. So there seems to be a lot of discrepancies between the Gospels. So how do you work around that?
And again, these are variants, and you'd have to take one by one, and because you had different eyewitnesses actually in their reporting, it shows that they're actually independent. And when one reported versus when another person reported, there could be a time lag, and because of that, things might have changed slightly, and this could be part of the reason for the variant. And I want to, in regards to the issue about slavery, slavery in the Bible is a form of indebtedness to pay off, for a servant to pay off an indebtedness. It also was a form of, for captives from a conquered nation, to prevent them from mustering a rebellion. Okay, the Bible actually condemns slave trade, and yes, it does, and it's punishable by death. So,
Mark,
Do you have a quote on that? Now remember, Jesus, there are two verses in the Bible where Jesus talks about slavery. The character Jesus, I don't think he actually existed. But in one of them he talks about just beating the slaves. Another one he talks about cutting them into little tiny pieces. He never says this is wrong. I don't know any verses talking about slave trade, but certainly the Bible never explicitly says, as I stated, that slavery is intrinsically morally wrong. It just says that you wouldn't want to be a slave.
no, it's, we do, to prevent prevent a conquered nation and foreigners from mustering a rebellion, we've actually done things very similar to that, and it's called Gitmo. So.
Okay, so one last question. I think this might be the last question because we have just a few minutes left. Do either of you believe that belief is a choice or not? Many Christians argue that atheists choose to disbelieve despite the evidence. Do you think that belief, you can choose to believe something, or is it just based on evidence?
Okay. And then also, after I answer, I have a few questions for the audience, if I may, too.
Okay, we can try that.
Okay. Do I believe that belief is a
Choice.
Is a choice? I don't see where it would be contradictory to believe that in reference to the scriptures. So, I mean, you have, again, like I mentioned earlier, God's not going to force you against your will to go to heaven if you don't want to. But I have a question for you.
Hang on.
Okay.
Give Mark a chance to respond to that belief is a choice thing.
Is that a yes or a no?
You said yes?
He said belief is a choice. I don't think belief is a choice, in my experience, which I'm the only one that can really judge what goes on inside my brain, just as all of you. Belief, to me, is about conclusions that I come to from my understanding of the world around me. I believe that George W. Bush actually exists. I believe that countries in Southern Africa exist. I've never been there. I've never experienced them. But I have those beliefs based on what I view as rational evidence. I have no belief in any God because I've seen no rational evidence that any God exists. So the belief to me is a conclusion based on the evidence that we pull in.
Okay, so how do you want to ask the question? Do you want a show of hands as answers, or?
Yeah, whoever, including Mark, whoever would like to answer this. There's been a number of near-death experiences in the world. And in some of these near-death experiences, actually a lot of them, where individuals are in the hospital and the EKG machine reads a straight line, there's no brain activity, they're actually dead for 3 days, or dead, however you want to interpret that. And during this time when they're dead and lying on the surgery table or they're not conscious, even as long as 3 days from that period, from the time they enter that hospital, they're talking about, they're whatever you want to call it, a spirit is floating around down the hallways into different rooms. And they come back to life. They're describing the conversations that went on. They've never been in this hospital, many of them. They're describing what's going on in a different room, what people are wearing. I see an answer over here. there's a lot of evidence of people. This has happened to a number of
Now,
people.
are these just stories or are these evidence? Because evidence is something you can test.
Okay, well, these are written stories, numerous written stories. Yes, sir. Well, no, the question is, how would they know the conversations that went on the day before when they were supposedly dead?
My point is they remember this experience, but if memory isn't part of the brain, do you believe that memory is not part of the brain?
I still don't see where the memory issue comes in.
What do you think memories are?
So if they're brain dead, how did they remember what they were doing?
They are coming back describing an experience that they had.
How could they do that if they're brain dead? I guess that's the question. How are they storing
Okay.
this information?
Well, let me get back to you on that.
Okay. So that is the good. I think that is the meat of the question. So if you're saying that people have died, and according to the Bible they're supposed to be taken up into heaven right away, why this limbo section where they're running around the hospital? Anyway, so let's stop it here because we're out of time, and I don't want this to turn into bedlam here. So let's thank them all for their debate. Thank you both.